Hi, everyone, and welcome to Gladverse TV. I'm your host, Laura Borland, and this is a show where the silver lining is always our North Star. Today, I'm really excited to share with you another episode from our Bounceback series, and this one is dealing with loss, specifically the death of someone close to us. Now, because of COVID, we are recognizing that, with 800,000 people at the time of this recording having lost their lives to this condition in the United States, we're seeing a tremendous amount of grief. But we've also forgotten about those people who would have died normally. For instance, like I lost my dad 2 months ago to bile duct cancer. And one of the challenges that I have found in this space is being unable to fully grieve or to honor that life in the way that it normally would have been with a larger funeral, with being able to have people come around to comfort us as a family. So I'm super excited to bring to you today two wonderful experts who can speak to this discussion and to guide us in this, what is our new normal. All right, so let me first introduce our guests. So we have Alison, and she's the founder and CEO of Advocate, a digital platform improving access and affordability to mental health care. And after years of working as a licensed therapist, Alison noticed inefficiencies in the space and decided to reimagine the dynamics of private practice therapy. Alison built Advocate in order to help patients find and pay for therapy while leveraging insurance. She resides in Los Angeles with her husband, newborn baby, and Australian Shepherd. And our second guest is Arlene B. Englander. She's a licensed clinical social worker and is a Columbia University trained licensed psychotherapist with over 20 years of clinical experience. She's developed programs on stress management, relationships, loss, emotional overeating, and other mental health issues while on staff at settings as diverse as American Express, TRS, and Cancer Care Inc. Her recent book, Let Go of Emotional Overeating and Love Your Food, a 5-point plan for success, published by Rowman and Littlefield, is an enjoyment-oriented guide to better health and fitness with an emphasis on effective stress management. Ladies, I cannot thank you enough for agreeing to be a part of this panel. I think it's going to be a fun kind of discussion and fun as it can be when dealing with loss, right? But more importantly, we would love to learn just what you're seeing in the marketplace, what is happening out there in the environment, and then provide our viewers with tools and tips on how to move through grief if they're currently experiencing that. So Alison, you have a tech platform. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you're seeing currently?
Sure. And yeah, thank you, Laura, for that intro and for having us. So Advocate really was created with a couple goals in mind, but really the main impetus for this was how can we improve access to care? How can we help people navigate cost when it comes to paying for therapy? And I think it goes without saying, this horrible tragedy that we've all been going through with COVID and this pandemic really has resulted in more people wanting to seek mental health treatment, which is fantastic that we've really increased that interest in seeking care. But of course, it's always unfortunate when people are coming because they've experienced loss, whether it be job loss or relationship loss, or, the worst kind of loss, which is death loss. And I'm sorry to hear about the death of your father.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. And so happy to speak about what we're seeing at Advocate, but really what it comes down to is just a huge influx in the number of patients that are coming to the platform looking to receive treatment, and the increase in the number of therapists on our platform that are looking to Advocate to help expand their back office operations and really help them navigate this time, because like I said, there really has been an increase in demand for mental health therapy.
Of course. And Arlene, what have you been seeing in your practice? You come face to face with your clients. What are some of the things that you've been seeing with regards to the space of loss?
Thank you. First of all, thank you so much, Laura, for having us today. And as well, I express my sincere condolences on the loss of your father.
Thank you.
I'm seeing a lot of what I saw before in terms of stress, anxiety, depression, issues with emotional overeating, which is one of my areas of specialty. I am myself a former emotional overeater, and a lot of that has to do with mismanaged stress, but an exacerbation of it. And to some degree, I believe that is due to the social isolation that many of us are experiencing. It's a time of loss, or a time of, as Alison hinted at, massive loss, as we're experiencing during a pandemic, loss of freedom, loss of our former feelings of being more relaxed and more carefree, and a loss of an ability to see people as freely as we would like to be. That is contributing to additional stress and the need, as I see it, for us to become more compassionate towards ourselves, because it's a time when we have less ability to access the sources of compassion, among others, that we may have had in the past. So I'm seeing the situation that we are dealing with in society increase what might have been former situations where we're experiencing stress, anxiety, and depression, and really heightening our need to be self-compassionate to ourselves, to be that someone who is there and nurturing for ourselves if we have less access to nurturing others during this period.
That is so incredibly powerful what you just mentioned, because in the past year and a half, it seems like the buzzword or the buzz phrase around is really about this whole idea of self-care, and really, this idea of really focusing on our mental health. And I'm super excited just listening to you and Alison about the acceptance now, that understanding that mental health is as important as a physical care. And I'm really an advocate for those practices, which I believe are powerful. So the self-compassion is something that is new. It still feels a little awkward for me, but it's because we're kind of hardwired to think that we should be selfless and care for everyone else except ourselves. So I just think that's incredibly powerful. Alison, did you want to add something?
No, I just want to echo what you said. I think we're all taught, from a young age to be selfless. And then, as Arlene said, you sort of lose track of the self, which is so important. And so I think, especially during these hard times when, anxiety is real. I say to people, if you're not a little anxious, you're not really paying attention right now. And I think it's just so important to look within, and it's different for everyone. I might enjoy being outdoors where you might enjoy time by your fireplace with a nice book, but whatever it is for you, I really echo what Arlene said about taking time out of your day to really focus on yourself and being compassionate. So I just wanted to echo that.
I'm very much in agreement. Do whatever you can to put a little fun factor into your life, because some of the things we enjoyed before may not be possible.
That is really, wow, that is interesting, because I really hadn't thought about how we had to do almost like a paradigm shift in a way, in terms of the way how we, the types of things we do for self-care. But I love the idea of, doing those things like going outside if that works for you, or like for me, my superpower is journaling. Like, I love it. I think it's the most powerful thing ever. It might not work for someone who is not so inclined to write. So, but what I've found is that even in my own experience with mourning my dad, is writing about just him in general, warts and all, so that it puts a much more balanced perspective as opposed to this, invincible hero. And I think putting that into perspective, into real world applicability, has helped me to process and continue to process this loss, and what that means for my life moving forward, and how best I can honor him in that space. You want to say something, Arlene?
Well, if I may share something, because you've you've hit upon an important point that Alison may wish to take up too. But during the years that I've worked with grieving people and the time I spent at Cancer Care, where we dealt almost primarily with people with very advanced cancer. And I worked with thousands of them during the 7.5 years I was there. Something that I noticed is that among families and among networks, we often see ambivalence. We may have ambivalence towards those we love. And this is normal, this is real. But the degree of ambivalence can affect how we handle our grief. Sadly, one of the most common after effects that I see, one of the most common, and I'm sure we're going to get to the difference between stages and feelings and this, that, or the other, but there's very often a sense of guilt when we haven't had that idyllic, non-existent, perfect relationship with the individual who passed away. And this is real, this is normal. Unfortunately, many of us feel that it's wrong, for example, if someone has been very ill and in pain and passes away, to feel relief. And it's really sad the way people are so hard on themselves and lose that self-compassion and lose the ability to be there for themselves and nurturing to themselves during a time of loss.
Yeah,
for sure. Alison, I wanted to touch back a little bit on in your former life as a marriage and family therapist. And what were your experiences with, in treating persons who had lost, a family member as part of that?
Yeah, happy to go into that. And I'll just kind of add to what Arlene was saying too. I lost my grandmother a few years ago to Alzheimer's, but she was struggling for about 3 or 4 years before she ultimately passed. And I do believe that two things can be true at the same time. So on one hand, I was grieving, I was incredibly sad. And on the other hand, I was a little bit relieved because she was out of pain and she was in a better place. And so I agree with what Arlene said there. When I had my own practice and before Advocate, I worked with mostly children and adolescents in inner city Los Angeles. And so a lot of the grief I saw was a mix of the loss of parents when I was working with these children, but also parents going to prison sometimes, parents having to move or be relocated. And one thing that I really tried to explain to these children was that grief is not always linear, and mourning is not always, you go through as Arlene said, the stages, and then you're done. This is something that can take years. It can take your whole life, to work through this. And so the stages of grief, you might have a couple bad days followed by a couple good days, and then maybe a couple more bad days. And it takes time, and not, no one person's path is the same when it comes to grieving.
I definitely agree with that. That was one of the things that I found. I'd lost my best friend some 20 years, well, maybe 16 years ago. And I was just devastated. She died suddenly. I found myself being unable to cope. Like I didn't want to eat. I just was, in a catatonic state for months. And I realized over time through journaling, and that's why I love it so much, I was able to pinpoint what my triggers were. And once you kind of are able to identify what those triggers are, it becomes a little easier to know how to respond and to not be as aggrieved. So I definitely understand where, that grief does not look the same every time. And that, think about someone who dies suddenly versus someone who has had, a prolonged illness. Very, very different. Arlene, you wanted to add?
May I share something briefly? If I mentioned stages, I don't want to create a misapprehension, because while there may be certain stages, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross herself, who wrote on death and dying and described the stages, has described it herself in a much more, I believe, helpful way, which has to do with the fact that these are not set stages with beginning, and the set stages that many of us think about are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. What I have found that families tend to experience are waves of feeling that can be extremely intense, especially at the beginning, but over time may lessen.
Totally.
And as we re-enter life in a meaningful way, and I do not use the term closure, there's no word that anyone, family member or myself included when I've been through loss, dislikes more than that. Over time, and what's key here is accepting those intense feelings, because they can be very strong and very scary. And I've been there, and even as a therapist, you know, they bowled me over. I had a sister who was extremely ill with very advanced cancer while I was leading relatives groups at cancer care. And it was an eerie experience, because there I was leading the group, knowing I was experiencing what I was talking to, but I did not want to share my experience during the group of people who were relatives, because I didn't want to take the focus off of them. But, you know, we're all in this when it comes to dealing with loss in life. But what I wanted to finish saying is that if we can acknowledge those intense and strong and scary feelings and accept those feelings, then we're in better shape to move on and find joy and meaning in life again. So as a quick PS, and then I want to let Alison have more time. I think journaling, which you are an expert on, we're aware, Laura, is a wonderful thing. And one of the things that's wonderful about journaling is that we are accepting of who we are and our feelings as we do it. It's a wonderful acknowledgement of the beauty of embracing who we are.
You can't lie to yourself.
Yes.
That's the power of journaling. You can't lie to yourself. You wear multiple facades for every aspect of your life. But with journaling, who are you going to lie to? So with that, it allows for, to me, a cathartic release. Not everyone enjoys it. And my brother, for instance, is just like, look, I can't even think about even writing a one-sentence text message back. So there's no way I'm journaling. But, you know, but there was something, Arlene, and then I'll get back to you, Alison. There was something that we had in a previous discussion about, I think I shared with you that when I received news of my dad, it was almost like we're grieving in increments. Every time we got more bad news, it would be like a burst of you know, tremendous grief. So it was like almost grieving while he was alive. So much so that when he passed, it didn't feel as intense, I suppose. Can you speak to that?
Would you like to
No, please go ahead.
One of the things that Laura and I discussed briefly when we were chatting on the phone originally is the concept of preparatory grieving or preparatory mourning, which takes place when families are dealing with a lengthy illness on the part of their loved one. And there is the ability then to slowly cope with what is happening, to experience those strong emotions at the same time. And one of the benefits, and that's a weird word to use, of a lengthy illness is that people have the time to be together, which is obviously something that people are wrestling with during the time of COVID, to be together. And most important, because if there was one message I felt was important, and for me to share at the times when I was working most intensely with grieving families, to share love. That is so important, to let the person know that you love them. And sadly, right now, many people have loved ones dying in hospitals and have to try to send some message through third hand. If you're like me, I'm doing what I did post 911, which is I'm getting back to the habit of saying at the end of every phone call with everybody I care about, love you. And because nothing like what we're not going through now can drive that home more
Yeah.
forcefully. Would you like to share
That's
your
powerful.
thoughts, Alison?
No, I think I agree with everything that you said. And it reminded me of something that Laura and I talked about also previously, which is that just kind of the tragedy that is there is loss happening, and COVID is perpetuating the way that people can sort of effectively grieve with their families, given the social distancing and the lack of travel. And so loss feels almost amplified right now, given the limitations that are put on all of us in terms of what we can do when someone actually is either sick or does ultimately pass. And so I think that's just, it's very devastating and very hard on everyone.
And when we can't be there to express our love, one of the most difficult downsides that I've often helped clients work with on this through the years, as I'm sure you may have as well, is the if only syndrome, the guilt that family members feel because they weren't able to be there in the way they wish they could. And this can happen both within and outside of the time of COVID, or to have had the relationship they wish they had had, or there are always, almost always, certain loose ends. And the sadness, the sad thing about this if only concept, this if only feeling, is that what we do, and I've seen this almost universally, I've seen it from so many clients, is we go back over the time that the person was ill or had the accident or whatever led to them passing away. And we create an illusion of a perfect path, a perfect road we would have taken, where we would have done X versus Y, whatever had actually happened. And the outcome would have been either avoiding the death or greatly lessening our pain. And in life, of course, we don't have total control.
Right.
So when we embark on this if only path, we create this illusion that we have total control in the world. But what is the price that we pay? Guilt. So anyone who may be listening and experiencing that, and I know that everyone, including myself at some times, has felt that, needs to be reminded, first of all, to be aware of what they're doing and why they're doing it. And secondly, to really take good care of themselves in terms of answering back those painful thoughts and letting themselves know that they did the best they could and they deserve to be able to go on with life and be comforted.
I agree. And just that you know, in every one of these episodes, we have something what's called a section that's called a moment of Gladversity, where you're overcoming an adversity with gladness in your heart. So I would love to hear from each of you. What's a great self-care practice that one can implement while going through a grief process that you found extremely helpful?
Yeah, I can start. One thing I encourage people to do is to make a short list of things that make them happy or things they want to accomplish. I think when you start to think too far in the future, it can get very overwhelming, especially when you're dealing with loss and pain and you're mourning. So I recommend making a short list. For me, it would look like, go for a walk today, go grab an iced coffee down the street, go open the book you wanted to open, something really tangible, something very doable. And as I cross those things off, I feel accomplished. I feel productive. Oftentimes when you're in deep mourning, you can feel unproductive. You can feel, like Arlene said, some guilt. You can start to go down on yourself. And, having that list, keeping you a little bit structured, but with very manageable tasks has really helped me and other folks that I know.
I love that. Arlene, did you have one?
Well, I would say along the lines of what I was saying earlier, that it has to do with making peace with yourself and that you did the best you could in the situation. And I would amend that because this is certainly something that I will deal with clients who are hard on themselves no matter what they're facing. And that can include emotional overeating, when we're overeating to distract ourselves from painful thoughts and feelings rather than for enjoyment and satisfying hunger, or people who may have tendencies to do other maladaptive activities, that they really tune in to what they are saying to themselves, become aware, and answer those thoughts back compassionately, much as a loving yet logical friend would do. Not only, and I think I stopped in mid-sentence, not only saying, I did the best I could, but I did the best I could. And this is to counteract the tyranny of the shoulds, which is another way of talking about if onlys. I did the best I could, given what I knew then and who I was at the time. Because a time of loss can also be a time of growth. When we get to know ourselves better, when we can even become closer with our family. And I'm sure, Alison, you would probably be enthusiastically be able to share so much if we talked about families and coping with loss per se. But to truly embrace that who we are now may not be who we are then, and that we will grow and learn and become better people, stronger people after this experience. And that realization is powerful and is helpful and is something I've clung to during times of loss.
Those are two great takeaways. And I would like to add one as well, something along the journaling realm. So I do gratitude journaling every day. But one of the things that I've found to be extremely powerful that I've integrated in my practice since my dad died is at the end of giving my appreciations and basically stating how I want to enter tomorrow, the last thing I do is I remember a fond memory of my dad. And I keep it really brief. And I go, I remember when we did XYZ or whatever, because oftentimes what I've found is that for people who've lost someone, they focus on the last days and not the totality of that amazing life. And what plays in the loop are the last days, not, 70 plus years of just a life that was vibrant and full of fun memories. And so I choose to honor my dad by just recalling just great things. And I don't make it very brief, very long. It's a paragraph at most, because what happens is that what I found is that once you start writing extensively, our brains, we like to self-calibrate. So you can't have all good and roses and fun times because you hear that, however, it wasn't all good. And so I found that has probably been the most effective of all, is to really hone in on, trick the brain a little bit by just writing briefly on something positive and leaving it alone before the negative thoughts creep in.
Yeah.
So that in itself I've found to be very practical. And wonderful. Are there any last thoughts that you ladies would like to share?
I would just say it's so important to reach out to your support system during this time. I know you mentioned the silver lining in the very beginning of this, and, for better or worse, we're all kind of in this pandemic together. We're all going through different forms of grieving and anxiety. And again, for better or worse, I feel like we have this universal shared experience of the chaos that has been the past almost 2 years. And so now more than ever, people in your support system hopefully can relate and understand and empathize with what you're going through. And so you're never alone. And it's really important to reach out to your trusted circle of family and friends when you're going through something difficult.
For sure. And thank God for Zoom. Like I can't even FaceTime, whatever it is, Google Duo, whatever. All this stuff's amazing. We're able to space.
I hear you. I can't agree more. And when, for whatever reason, that support group is not available, either by phone or virtually, and that is what therapy, including the wonderful new ways of access that Alison is talking about, what therapy can do for us in terms of helping us become a support group of one to ourselves.
I like that.
I hadn't even thought about it, but it just dawned on me when we mentioned about Zoom and just leveraging technology in that way. We have a lot of young people who have zero interest in speaking to a person on the phone, much less doing a Zoom. And I share that because my nieces and nephews, like if you don't send them a text, there's just no way they're responding. They don't answer calls. It's just like, so I wonder how they process, just an afterthought, but we could probably, line it up for a discussion, let's say on our Facebook page. But I wonder how young people are processing who don't like to communicate via voice or their likeness, right? How they're coping with, loss and just loss of a lot of their freedoms, as you alluded to earlier, Alison.
Yeah. No, it's a great point. There are different channels out there. There are platforms where you can text with a licensed therapist. It's not my preferred method, but I hear you that it's good for certain groups. There are therapists who will do telehealth sessions, whether phone or video. And then of course there's in-person as it's safe to do so, permitting safety. So the good news is therapy comes in many forms and many formats, and hopefully there's something for everyone.
Love that. Ladies, I want to thank you so much for just an amazing discussion, so well-rounded with useful tips that we can all use. And in closing, I would like everyone to know that we will have links to Alison's page, also to her work with Advocate, and Arlene's contact information as well as links to her book. And guys, follow them. I mean, they are extraordinary women, accomplished women who are doing amazing things. And hey, let's book them for speeches and talks and other panels and get them more TV and press. And it just works out beautifully for everyone.
May I also share one thing, that there is a 60-page chapter in Let Go of Emotional Overeating and Love Your Food that is devoted totally to dealing with stress. And a lot of it does deal with loss as well. So, and the book is available not only on Amazon, but in libraries all over the country. So hopefully that will be helpful to people as well.
Hey, there's always a need. This channel is Everyday Woman TV. Everyday women have gone through all of these issues: stress, overeating, like depression, all of those different things. And that's one of the critical things we're looking at with this Bounceback series, is recognizing that from every walk of life, there's something relatable, something that we've all experienced. And maybe within this discussion, there's a vignette, something that was not heard before, that allows for people to try something new and fresh, or to remember that had worked for them in the past. So I recognize that these are tough times, but the more I see faces like you still around, the more resilient I know the world is. We're doing great. We're hanging in there, a little bruised, but we're doing all right. All right, guys, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, and keep safe and well, everyone.
You too.